I have some tea. I'm wearing my Cheshire Cat shirt. I have some chess-themed socks. And I have a large pile of books. It must be time for my Victober TBR. So Victober, or Victorian October, is a month-long readathon hosted by Lucy the Reader, Kate Howe, Katie from Books and Things, and Ange from Beyond the Pages. The goal of this readathon is to read as much Victorian literature as possible, and to help with that, each of the hosts has provided us with the challenge of a certain type of book to read during the month of October. There's also a group read-along and a group challenge. I haven't read that much Victorian literature, though I think I've read more than I thought I had, but I'm still trying to catch up on many of the more well-known classics of Victorian literature, so I won't be doing all the challenges this month, but I will be doing some of them. The first challenge I will be participating in is from Katie from Books and Things. The challenge is to read one book under 250 pages, or a book over 500 pages. And with Victorian literature, this was surprisingly easy. I think you can guess based on what I'm wearing what my choice will be. For a book under 250 pages, I'll be reading Through the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll. My dad read this to me when I was little, but I've never read this on my own. I'm kind of excited to read it because, like most people, I've conflated the two worlds of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass because that's what the Disney movie did. However, the two worlds are somewhat different from what I understand. And in this one, as the title implies, Alice goes through the looking glass to a mirror world, and as you can tell by the cover, Tweedledee and Tweedledum are in this world and not Wonderland. And I believe that the villain of this work is the Red Queen, who is a cold, calculating chess piece, rather than the Queen of Hearts, who is the villain of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Like I said before, this is a kind of slim volume, so I think that this will give me a good sense of accomplishment when I finish it during this month. For the other part of the challenge, to read a book over 500 pages, I've chosen David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. I haven't read much Charles Dickens yet, but I'm trying to work my way through all of his works, and I'm beginning with his more well-known works. Now, David Copperfield is over 1,000 pages, at least in this edition. My goal is to start reading this book in September, though September hasn't been the best reading month, so I'm not sure how well that will go. I might have to resign myself to the fact that I will be reading this past the month of October. I'm really excited to read David Copperfield because I really enjoyed Great Expectations, which is a book in a very similar vein. They're both coming-of-age stories, and they're both told from a first-person perspective. I really enjoyed Jane Eyre, and Great Expectations was very similar to it, but it was much easier to relate to a male protagonist, so I figured that David Copperfield will be very similar. I'm also excited for the BBC miniseries adaptation because it features a young Daniel Radcliffe as young David Copperfield, and also Maggie Smith as Betsy Trotwood. I think there might be other Harry Potter actors in that adaptation, so I'm really excited to get to David Copperfield. Another exciting part of this Victober for me, aside from being my first time taking part in this readathon, is that in the middle of this month of October, October 13th, John Henry Newman, also known as Cardinal Newman, will be made a saint. He'll be canonized. John Henry Newman was a very influential figure both in the Anglican Church and then after he converted to Catholicism in the Catholic Church, and for English culture during the Victorian era in general. He was highly influential. What's exciting for me as an avid reader of fiction is also that John Henry Newman was a novelist. He wrote 2 novels, which means that he will be the first novelist that at least I know of to be canonized, a saint of the Roman Catholic Church. He's also highly influential in the field of theology, influencing the theology of the Second Vatican Council. He was one of the greatest theologians writing in English, which is really cool. And he's also highly influential, some maybe even say, the originator of the Catholic literary revival. So I figured I have to read at least one of his novels during this Victober, and the novel I chose is Callista. The subtitle is A Sketch of the 3rd Century. I don't know too much about what this book is about, and the more research I do, the more spoilers I find, so I kind of just had to stop. What I was able to find, as well as what the subtitle told me, is that this book takes place during the 3rd century in northern Africa, obviously in the Roman Empire. It begins with a new Christian, I can't remember his name, it's a Roman name, who ends up meeting a pagan brother and sister pair, and the sister is Callista, and he ends up falling in love with her. And of course, this is during the reign of one of the Roman emperors who is persecuting the Christians. So of course, that main character has to deal with his Christianity during the persecution. And also Calista, I understand, begins to doubt the pagan Roman gods and begins to be attracted to the newfangled religion of Christianity, and of course also has to deal with the possibility of persecution. I've heard various things about Newman's novel writing skills, though I chose Callista because it seemed like it would be more novel-like than his other work, Loss and Gain, which seems to be more semi-autobiographical. And so I figured that I might enjoy Callista more. Also, I got this copy for $1 at a used book sale, so that was also a large factor in my choosing to read this book first. Now, really, the canonization should just be the start of Newman's influence in my life. And so I have to keep reminding myself I don't have to read everything he wrote before October 13th. But I figured I should read at least one of his nonfiction theological works during Victober, or at least start it. And so I've heard from multiple people that the best place to start with Newman's theology is this book, An Essay on the Development of Christian Doctrine. And this is one of his most famous works. It was highly influential on the Second Vatican Council. So if you're interested in theology, I'd recommend it. And even if you're not, the significance of this work kind of helps answer the question, does the Catholic Church change its teachings in response to the changing times? I think the answer will be yes and no, as most things with Catholic theology. But I think maybe the simplest way that I understand the core of this book is the analogy of a tree. That Catholic doctrine, the Catholic teaching, begins in seed form in places like Scripture and early church tradition, like the Church Fathers. But a seed, when it's planted, it grows into something that's alive. And so Catholic tradition and Catholic teaching is alive. And so it grows through the ages into a fully mature tree, which is, when it's fully mature, it becomes defined by a pope as a dogma. But basically, this work helps to remind us that the Catholic Church, the Catholic tradition, Catholic doctrine is a living tradition, and that oftentimes it's still growing and developing. And it's still, even though it's a tree now, it's still the same teaching at its core as when it was a seed, though it looks very different now than it did in its origin. I think I'll also make a video specifically about Newman. I'm not sure if it'll be about his life or his influence on other famous writers, but I think that'll be really fun to do later on. The challenge from Ange from Beyond the Pages was to read a book written by a female author, and bonus points if it's a female author you have not read before. So the book I'm choosing does get the bonus points. It's Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And this was also part of my Classics-a-thon TBR, along with Through the Looking Glass, and both of those I didn't finish, but I told myself I could read them now during Victober instead. Frankenstein is the doctor who, in his quest for glory, decides to make a new human being out of the body parts of dead human beings. Frankenstein is perfect for the spookiness of the month of October, and I think I might also use it for the group challenge, which is to read a book by candlelight. I think it's also cool because October is Respect Life Month, and so Frankenstein, although it's a work of fiction, touches on many life issues today, especially bioethical issues, and it's just becoming more and more scary and more realistic, especially if you consider most recently that the first genetically modified humans were born this past year. I heard it's also really interesting because the perspective it's written from is kind of a puzzle box, kind of like Wuthering Heights, where there's several levels of narration, and the deeper you get into the narration, the deeper you get into the story, but also there's a question of reliability. So I think that'll be really fun to read, especially during the month of October. The next book I'm reading was actually kind of a surprise. I was not originally planning on reading it, but when I found out that George MacDonald was a Victorian writer, from Katie from Books and Things, I decided I would give him a try, and so I'm reading the book Lilith. And so this is another book where I'm not entirely sure what it's about. I tried really hard to find out why the title is Lilith, because I just keep thinking of Frasier's wife on the show Frasier. And of course, in looking for it, I did get some spoilers, so I had to stop again. And I think that this legend is incorporated into this book, is that Lilith, according to Jewish mythology, is supposedly Adam's first wife, who was rebellious and did not want to submit to God's plan of being the mother of all the living, of all of Adam's children. And so Lilith was dismissed, and God made Eve instead. And Lilith seems to be kind of a demonic figure in this work. Apparently, this work is very similar to Alice in Wonderland in that it involves a character, Mr. Vane, a librarian, going into a fantastical world that very often doesn't make sense. But I think that eventually Lilith ends up making some sense. George MacDonald was a Scottish writer, so that's also interesting to be reading a non-English Victorian writer. Additionally, he writes with many Christian themes. Also, interestingly, C.S. Lewis writes the introduction to this edition, and George MacDonald was a very big influence on C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis edited an edition of George MacDonald's either short stories or poetry, I believe, and also in Lewis's work, The Great Divorce. George MacDonald kind of acts like the Beatrice or Virgil, the guide, leading the narrator through heaven. I haven't read The Great Divorce, I just kind of know that fact for some reason. And finally, and I'm not sure if I'm going to get to this, but I wanted to include it anyway, because I think that's the point of TBRs, is to list more books than you can possibly read in 1 month. The next book is Tess of the Durbervilles by Thomas Hardy. I've never read anything. I know the basic outline of Tess of the Durbervilles is about a young woman named Tess Durbervilles, whose father figures out that they are distantly related to the very aristocratic Durbervilles, a family in the village, and so he sends Tess as his representative to that family. And while she's there, she gets attacked. It's unclear whether it was rape or somewhat consensual between Tess and this character. And so the rest of the book follows the aftermath of what happens when Tess goes to visit the Durbervilles. I heard this is not a very happy book, it's very depressing. And I've heard that's kind of par for the course with Thomas Hardy, but I wanted to read it because I've heard a lot of good things about it. So that's my Victober TBR. I can't wait to get started. I will also be making some Victorian themed videos this month. I'll be taking part in the Victober Goodreads group, which I'll link down below. I will also link the announcement videos down below. If you are taking part in Victober, let me know what you're planning on reading this month in the comments down below. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like what you're seeing on this channel, please don't forget to subscribe. I hope that you get a chance to take a break from YouTube and read a book today. Happy Victober, everyone. Bye.